Okay, here we go. All right, hello everyone. Um, Justin will be back in just a second. He's having some technical stuff come up, but he should be back in the room. But welcome everyone into space today. This is our non-Buddhist Buddhist practice discussion. Which I like to just refer to it as like, how to like practice anything that you want and call it Buddhist, um, which is a lovely thing. But before we begin, I know people are still trickling in. We're going to start with just a little bit of practice. This will give people time to get in. It's good time for Lama and Justin to get back into the room as well. Okay, so we'll begin. So we'll just begin just by, allowing our bodies to come into a position that feels appropriate for us. And as we, move through this practice, I want us to really think about agency and choice. Some of us feel as if we have no choice right now, just because of being in quarantine and so forth. But I want us to really reclaim this experience of agency in our practice. I want you to make choices about where you're going, what you're focusing on. I want you to be in discernment, about what you're adopting into your present practice and what you're letting go of. But ultimately, I want us to just have a lot of agency around what is conducive to our enlightenment and what isn't conducive to our enlightenment. And I think that this is like what the heart of the practice, or rather our discussion, is going to be about today. What's conducive for us? What's conducive for our realization, our enlightenment, for our compassion, for our generosity, for our vulnerability? What's conducive for all of that? What's not conducive? Okay. So just a little bit of grounding, a little more grounding. Just noticing the seat under you, noticing the weight of the body, noticing the sensations of the body making contact with whatever you're sitting on and resting on. Letting the seat hold you, and trusting the seat to hold you. Noticing the earth under us that's holding everything. Connecting to the earth, using your attention to touch into the earth. This is like the heart of the Bhumisparsha practice of touching the earth. It's just touching, literally touching into the earth, letting the earth hold your attention, letting the earth touch you back. And coming back to our breath, noticing the breath, checking in with the breath. Let your breath actually tell you how you're doing. What is that like? And just letting the breath just simply be, regardless of where it's at, how it's doing, just let it be there. Don't change it, don't alter it, nothing like that. Just leave it there. Just leaving our body as it is, noticing our body, but just leaving it. Not getting deeper into it, not trying to adjust. Just like, let's just see it for what it is in this moment and say, okay, there you are. And turning your attention to your mind and noticing thoughts and emotions. Noticing the quality of mind. What is mind? How is your mind? These thoughts and these emotions, the space, all the stuff in the mind, just let it be there. This is our natural mind, our natural breath, our natural body. Let the earth be natural. Let this moment be natural. Let ourselves altogether be natural. Just let everything be there. Let everything be there. Okay, friends. All right. I have a need to do a little bit of a spinal twist. All right. Cool. Welcome, Lama Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Rod. Welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah, I like your scarf. It makes you look kind of borderline hipster.
Yeah, I figured
It's like you live in Brooklyn.
I know, right? I call you a little security blanket.
Ooh, yeah. All right. So here we are.
Yeah.
For the talk. We started having these conversations at some point. I think in a meeting or, but this is just a continuation, of that talk, of that conversation. And again, for those of you who are just joining, this is our non-Buddhist Buddhist practice panel, and really, this is about. I think this is important. Because I think I want to say we have to draw the line, but I don't think we are drawing the line, but we're also blowing it up at the same time. So both are happening at the same time. I think we're defining something really important for how this community, the Bhumisparsha, is moving forward. I think this is something that will intensely. It will be a very sharp contrast in how we move forward in relating within the community of Buddhists. Western Buddhism tends to be, and I know Western Buddhism mostly in the UK and in the US, so those are the two countries where I spend a lot of time trying to do this. But from what my experience has been, it's like the Buddhism, the culture of Buddhism has been so rigidly defined and drawn, in a way that I don't think is authentic to the development of Buddhism, to the historical context of Buddhism. And I think the way in which we have, defined Buddhism in the West actually just reflects the ways in which we live in systems that are always defining who we are, and always defining what's in, what's out, in order to figure out how to control it, how to dominate it. So that's a lot of what we're doing in this conversation, is trying to kind of get more into that. I think another thing too is I'm interested, I guess, more on a personal level, or I rather on a more practice level, which I think relates to everyone who's gathered here, and of course everyone who will see this video in the future. I think what we're also interested in is embracing the things that tend to us. That tending, this word tending is something that Adrienne Maree Brown uses. And I love the word, because the word tending, for me, is very it feels very full, it feels very generative, it feels very restorative, it feels very precise. I think the word tending is something that, it's like the experience that I have when I do a certain practice. I can't tell you what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I feel freer, open, more vulnerable, and for me, that's an expression of something tending to me. Something has tended, something has opened deeply inside of me, and so I'm interested in how we embrace the things that tend to us, as a community, and not really getting so wrapped up in, well, is this, what is this thing that's tending to us? What is this? Where does this practice come from? Is this Buddhist? Is this whatever? Is this, whatever, and I want to also, this is the last thing I'll say too, as my kind of introduction to this conversation. I want to lay all my cards on the table too. I mean, maybe not right now in this very second, but over the course of this conversation, I just want to get really, I just want to put everything out there. I want my intentions to be out there, my agenda and everything, just to be very clear about why, what I'm intending to do. But I'll just say this last thing is that there's a whole world, unseen world around us. And for me, I came into Tibetan Buddhism specifically. Really Tibetan Buddhism chose me. I wasn't even looking. Then all of a sudden it was there. But I think Tibetan Buddhism actually tended to something in me about wanting to get access to into the unseen worlds, which was so much of my upbringing. But because of Christianity, I felt there was such a block in actually touching into the unseen world as well. And Tibetan Buddhism gave me access to that. You can read about that, actually. I wrote a little short article for a larger dialogue for Lion's Roar. You can find it online somewhere. If someone wants to, I'll actually look for it. I think I know where it is. I'll just post that for people's reference as we continue. So that's what I'll say to start with.
Yeah.
I'll pass it on to Justin.
Yeah, no, thank you, brother. And before I start, I totally agree. I want to share my kind of perspective on this and intention for moving forward over the course of this conversation too. And I want to thank you for just planting that seed. I hadn't originally thought of that, so thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some respect, I think I agree 100%. I feel like we, especially in America, because that's what I know best, Now we suffer from a lot of things, and one of them is I would definitely say kind of the whiteness in relationship to a academic understanding of what pure Buddhism is or isn't, regardless of tradition. So we have the benefit of a very active scholarly Buddhist community in the West and in the East, and it allows us the opportunity to look deeply into our respective traditions, whether it's Tibetan Buddhist or Tantric Indian Buddhist or Zen or whatever it is, and our patterning in relationship to whiteness definitely seems to still kind of keep us oriented around the fact that there is somewhere a pure Buddhism, or pure Dharma. And when you look at the tradition and you try and kind of like take those glasses off and look at some of the ways these traditions are founded, they tend to have been really messy in some ways. They arose out of a mess that's not necessarily pure. And then in some cases, there's very little scholastic understanding of where certain things, especially Tantra, came from, both in the Hindu and Buddhist tradition. And so some people will say, some things arose first within the Buddhist tradition and then ended up in the Hindu tradition, and then vice versa. And then even in relationship to the quote-unquote traditions, it still remains to be seen how many of these practices have their seed in indigenous Indian faith traditions that lay outside of the corpus of either. And so my real passion is Indian Tantric Buddhism, and how that although I came to the tradition through Tibetan Buddhism, my love of the tradition is really like the siddhas, like in the Mahasiddhas, and the development of Tantra, and how messy that was, but then also at the same time, how when you look at the literature, there really wasn't necessarily a huge division for a lot of these early figures between what was Hindu and what was Buddhist. And so there is proof in terms of like all of the protector practices that Naropa did that include Chinnamunda and forms of Kali, and so now we're you can't in a lot of Dharma centers now like introduce a Kali practice without people making a big deal out of it being Hindu.
Right.
And this relates directly to the whiteness piece in terms of needing to classify everything, and a lot of this kind of may be able to be blamed on the British, for kind of early scholasticism. A lot of this can be blamed on the British for a lot of this early scholasticism, but I think the important thing to remember is that just because we can go on academia.edu or even go to grad school for things doesn't necessarily mean that we know the source. And so for me, like, it's funny because when I was young, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and it wasn't it definitely wasn't because of Indiana Jones movies, but what it was, and it took me a real long time to figure this out, because I went from being interested in archaeology to archaeology and religion, and then my parents had terrible experiences with Christianity, and in growing up with raising me and my sister, they really said we don't want you to pick, we don't want you to have a religious practice other than something that feels good, and we want you to have something, because we understand how important that is. So really, before I became a chaplain, I'd only been in a church, I'd been in cathedrals to see the stained glass and stuff like that, and the architecture, but I'd never been in an active church except for maybe 2 or 3 times. And I'm very grateful to my parents for that. But I also can't claim to not be affected by Abrahamic thinking, because we live in the culture that we do, and our justice system and ways of relating to right and wrong are deeply rooted in that. And so that culturally impacts us, and it also impacts us in relationship to the way we practice Dharma and our relationship to duality, and then perhaps informs a difficult relationship to Tantra, because we are so justice oriented because of the Abrahamic ways in which we tend to relate to right or wrong, or punishment, or that kind of stuff. My earliest experience with anything dharmic was a dream I had when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And we just moved to New York from Massachusetts, and I had this dream of later I realized it was Mahasiddha Saraha. And so I too, like Dharma picked me in a way that I don't really understand. And it really wasn't until going out to India and studying with my first teacher that not only did I kind of connect very deeply to it, but that was in Sikkim. And in Sikkim, once you get out, especially outside of big monasteries, but also maybe to some extent in those monasteries, you begin to see that the hard definitions of the tradition that we might learn in college are not hard there. Yeah. Right. So you'll have lamas. One of my lamas, Padang Rinpoche, was considered a great sorcerer, and so he was always kind of like battling local demons, or helping people with. I did 6 months of retreat at his retreat place in the mountains in Sikkim, and there was a young girl there who had originally come to him paralyzed, and over the course of 6 months, he, through his pujas and his magic and all of that, had gotten it to the point where she had not full use of her right hand, but she had full use of everything else. So there is an entire unseen world that we forget, and especially as kind of, whether we like it or not, like the impact of rationalism and Abrahamic thinking really can mess with that. And then at the same time, some of us come from, cultural backgrounds or family, backgrounds that are deeply rooted to other traditions. And, I think one of the things that came up recently in a conversation with Rod is this kind of exploration of how we can use Dharma practice to subjugate those things, thereby creating violence in relationship to these things that are inherently connected to us in ways that we don't even, that's the thing about karma. It's like if we practice Buddhism, it's not that we always have to be reborn in India. Right? We're born all over the place in other worlds and others, like all over the place. And if we really accept that, that means that the expression of our faith can't just take one or two cultural, like a Tibetan or an Indian, cultural manifestation, right? So Dharma and Buddha nature and Buddhahood can take every single possible, formation, and we don't need to necessarily just hold on to these things. And in fact, perhaps we could even say that that enlightenment isn't possible when we're attached to just these, couple of forms, like, Indian or Tibetan or Sri Lankan or Cambodian or, Burmese or Nepali, Burmese, etc. And so these conversations like this, I agree, are rare. And I think I also feel passionate about this kind of, maintaining a practice space and a culture space within Bhumisparsha that allows us to relate to the tradition, but then also understand that the tradition itself is hardly defined, in a clear way. And it always arises out of something else. So, in the Tibetan tradition, like you find indigenous, spirit deities who have worked themselves into the canon that didn't exist in Indian Buddhism. Pehar and all these local mountain gods, and the Tsarangma sisters didn't exist, in Indian Buddhism. They arose, and Guru Rinpoche went around, Tibet, maybe or maybe not, like bringing these, local indigenous spirits and gods and goddesses into the tradition. The beautiful thing about that is that that's what helped synthesize the Dharma there, right? And it stands to reason that Dharma and a lot of those deities became Dharma protectors, right? And so they had a positive relationship within the tradition. It wasn't just like a colonial thing where he cut everybody down and said, "Now we're taking over." And similarly here, I think there needs to be, and I don't think there is, sensitivity around that healthy blending of Dharma practice in with Yoruba practices, with Santeria practices, with practices from various indigenous peoples across the country, Gaelic practices if you come from an Irish or Scottish background, Western magical practices, like alchemical practices. Because we see that, the irony and the weird thing is that, like, if you look at what they study in divinity schools, which I'd never had to go through, is though you can trace that in terms of Christianity, like the impact of the African American experience in the church, right? But for some reason, that's not done so much. It might be done, scholastically, but in terms of our Dharma centers and our Dharma communities, we don't really jump into that, which is strange.
Well, because white Western colonization has disrupted these indigenous practices, even for like Gaelic practices, even for like white, ancestral practices. You talk to like Irish folks about that, reclaiming that, that ancestry and that those practices. But we've been so completely disrupted, through colonization, imperialism, white supremacy, capitalism, that it's so sterilized, So what we're actually kind of like struggling, well, I was just saying in my experience, what I've actually been struggling with coming into Dharma is, even in Tibetan Buddhism, a censoring of connecting even more deeply. And the question that I began to have early in my practice actually was like, well, if Tibetans got to like incorporate their local gods into their tradition, why can't I incorporate my local gods into my practice? That's a question that I held for a number of years until very recently, up until I started getting into plant medicine, and of course that just kind of like, ripped open the door. And it also reminds me, John, you remember in the retreat last year, we did Ostara practice at Gaia House. I called it Tara practice, but Ostara, is like the goddess of the spring, who is like actually the inspiration for Easter. And that all the stuff that we do in Christianity around Easter is actually related to her festival. It's like you start making those connections to start reconnecting. Yes, outside in the sun, yeah, and so, and just so for me, it's like, what I've been experiencing, really intensely since September, is a kind of intense relationship with my ancestors and with the gods of my ancestors, with Yoruba gods, with particularly with Anansi, which I've incorporated him into my practice, and I think there is so much for us to explore in that, to make, and from a deity from African religion, to bring that deity into Dharma, which isn't like a huge stretch, because I know some of you are doing like deity practices in other traditions, but like all this is a matter of creating oaths and vows with deities, and you say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I, this is my ethic, and then the deity fits into that, and then you also agree to do something for the deity. I'm grateful it's not sacrificing anything or doing stuff like that, but it's about, remembering and honoring, for me, a deity that's been forgotten within my ancestry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But who's still strong. And I don't feel as if that's outside of Dharma. I feel like this is exactly what we, in the mythology of Padmasambhava, this is exactly what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And many other teachers, they were just like, oh, here's this deity that I'm connecting with. Okay, let's like do this whole relational contractual thing where like this deity becomes part of my practice.
Yes.
And this deity helps me to do certain things, and I help it to do certain things as well. And often what we're helping these deities to do is to be remembered, and not forgotten. These worldly deities aren't necessarily enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
They're generous. They're, there's some ethical, kind of like, they have a sense of like what's right and wrong, but like they're not quite what we say enlightened, but they're good and beneficial and supportive, and you can recognize that in a relationship and support one another in that. And it took Tibetan Buddhism for me to actually get into this new world, to reconnect to this unseen world,
Yeah.
Even, I think about, I know some of you here maybe are coming out of Dharma Ocean, for instance, and so you go to Blazing Mountain. It's Blazing Mountain, right? The retreat center, you have Blazing Mountain, and their retreat center is in Colorado. And they have a totem to one of the local protectors as well. It was it was a bear, right? The totem was a bear protector in the shrine room. And so they were able to connect to like one of the indigenous ancestral deities on the land. And that mountain is actually quite special anyways. Several like spiritual centers from different traditions, not just Buddhist, but other traditions on this mountain. So it's almost like a power place, we would say, with a lot of spiritual energy, and so they connected to the local deity and they set up a shrine, in the meditation hall, which is a big wooden totem of a bear. I forget the deity's name, actually. And I just felt like that was so beautiful. And I said, okay, well, what else? Like how much further can we go?
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a Dharma friend I have who is Puerto Rican, and his parents both, came to the city from Puerto Rico, and he grew up here, and eventually he was like, a couple different Protestant faith traditions, and then he discovered Dharma, and was connected with a Nyingma teacher who lives in Queens, who was invited down to Puerto Rico to give some teachings. And while he was there, some folks were talking to him about Shango, who's a kind of a local deity practice there. And this Kempo had a dream where Shango came to him, and he said, I'll help protect you in your activities here, but you need to give me a bunch of bananas every day, wrapped in a red thread. Yeah. And so the Kempo was like, absolutely. And he told, this is my friend who was familiar with the practice because, he grew up in the culture. And so he as well, he spoke with the Kempo about it, and the Kempo said, bring that into your practice. That's important. And that became something that was important to him. And
Mhm.
Rod, I mean, we were just in India on
Yeah.
pilgrimage to primarily, Hindu, in
Mhm.
Hindu spaces, deemed Hindu spaces. And the power there was just, it was palpable. And there was Dharma there. There's Dharma everywhere. And I think that if we just went around the same way, like it would be terribly violent to go around with humans and just go around and categorize them and just be like, I'm going to relate to this kind of person, not that kind of person. We, unfortunately, are patterned to some extent, right, by systemic oppression to do that. We do that with our faith too, time to time, or all the time in some cases. And I think the important thing is really recognizing what drives us in our practice. And for me, like, and I'm, this is one of the focuses of the book I'm working on now, is charting my relationship to Vajrayogini and what that's led to, and what that's leading to is actually but like the heart of Vajrayogini and all of these related practices is not just, a Buddhist practice. It's, relating to this form of, the mother that intersects with all spiritual practices that not only arise there, but probably in other places as well. And I think to some extent, once we open our eyes to these things, you can't go back.
Exactly.
You can't go back to just practicing a straight, like, Buddhist thing.
Yeah.
Once your eyes have opened up to all of the other beings that are there, or the fact that this Buddhist deity may have just been the way light hit stained glass to take that form, but the light itself is some other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. It was so beautiful sharing as well.
Yeah.
And that's how we have to start talking about this. Someone I'm not, people talk shit, right? And then I come across it on social media, and of course I block them, because, as we said growing up, and I'm not trying to let Satan take my blessing away. So, but someone was like, after, like, we had a panel, I guess it was our first panel, the opening a couple of weeks ago, and someone got on social media and was like, oh, I guess evangelical Buddhism is a thing now.
Oh.
I was like, lock. And like, I wasn't tagged. Like, it wasn't like I was tagged, but like the one that I followed, someone who was very familiar with me and who would have been in the room that night, right? But it really got me thinking, actually, about like this idea of evangelicalism, which, evangelicalism was really this movement that was emerging of like fundamental Christianity and the hippies. Like, if we blame that, we have to blame the hippies for this, for evangelicalism, because those teachers, those Christians came out of the hippie movement in San Francisco, nonetheless. And of course, these people were fostered and supported by fundamentalist communities, and that created evangelicalism. But at the heart of evangelicalism is the personal relationship that I have with God, right? God is talking to me directly, which, of course, yes, that's a slippery slope. Absolutely. But, of course, this idea of evangelical Buddhism, I just really started like really working with it. And for me, I kind of came into this place where like we have a right to touch into divinity on our own terms. That there are all these practices and these methods, these strategies that we're working with and the relative that help us to actually transcend into, the the ultimate, and I feel as if we have a right to determine what those skills and strategies are for us. What, again, going back to what I said earlier, what tends to me, what's conducive for my realization, how can I just have the agency to reach out and to touch those things and bring those into my experience, and not being told that this is somehow outside of the parameters of whatever community that I'm identifying with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that we don't even have, it's more than having a right. The practices empower us to do that. Like when you look at some kind of more classical Mahamudra texts, it comes back to, and I touch on this in modern Tantric Buddhism, like beginning to understand that everything is the teacher. Right? So everything from what's happening outside of our house, to everything that's arising within us, to everything that's arising within our practice. And and I agree that there is, always some slippery slope kind of, around needing to quote unquote check, especially when, like, our desire to be something more than we actually are. It's always some kind of shadow. But that's the case for everybody. And for all people. I don't know about animals, but Dharma practice is very limited if we don't allow ourselves to interact directly with what's happening with who we are and where we come from and what tends us, like, as you say. And when you look at all the practices, that say, receive empowerment and then go out and practice, that's not just to take a text literally and only do what's there. It's to go out and practice and interact and integrate. And once we open ourselves to integration, there's a lot of stuff inside there and inside of us that arises. And the options are, cut down everything that doesn't seem Buddhist, or, to really be Buddhist about it, it's sit with what's coming up, with what's arising, what was there before we became Buddhists. And then as we develop in our practice, what comes up after that? I mean, like, we might become a Hindu group, like, in 10 years or whatever. But it's about the journey. It's not about, adhering to an identity and carrying that identity with us entirely, because we're bigger than that.
Well, to get free, you have to be adaptive. Anyway, and the thing that Western practitioners have lost is adaptability. Now we've been in this pandemic and the quarantine, and so many sanghas I'm seeing online, they're just kind of just doing the same thing. And at some point, the world has to begin to dictate the practice. It's like, I do a lot of different practices, but like also what I'm talking about is actually energy and apocalypse, and death. For me, that's what's really up, and I want to like get into that. But like, but the Buddhist community isn't talking about that. It's almost as if there's like a way that there's a party line.
Sure.
And everyone's lining up around that. But like, for me, it's like, no, this is about actually riding energy to get woke right now. Not just managing, not just like dealing with all the stuff that's coming up. No, I actually want to consume it. Right. I want to be fierce about this consumption and move to something else, move into a place of more realization, more openness, more enlightenment, right? But that means I have to adapt. That means when some aspect of Buddhism gets in the way, I have to kill it. This is why we say when you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. You know, one of the interpretations, at least. But how can we have the fierceness to to adapt? You know, I mean, you know, we talk about deities, and I know Sadada and I have been talking about this. Sadada, get ready. I want you to come onto the screen and have a conversation. Put your clothes on. Put your bra on, honey.
Yeah. Oh, there she is.
We've been so we've been having this conversation the past few days about deities, you know, and about, you know, I know there was a lot of questions about deities, right? You know, and I think one of the things that we're trying to do is not reach out and let's just reach out and grab, you know, and pull in and assimilate, but rather you wait for the deity to call you, to connect to you, you know. And that's a anti-colonialist, anti-assimilationist kind of process. That's the path, you know, that's more generative, more liberatory. You wait, you know, like Anansi reached out to me, right? And that began a relationship, you know. And then that begins this whole, like, okay, let's start negotiating. Like, what does this look like? This is what I believe. This is who you are. So let's get together, you know, and see if you can't enhance my practice and to see if I can't offer you something that you need. Because the deities, the worldly deities need something, you know, and we need something, you know. And my practice, you know, recently has been defined and has been, well, not defined, but my practice has been informed by the unseen world, you know, particularly during the pandemic right now, you know, just been really like, okay, what do you need? And what can I do to meet those needs? That's being adaptive, that's listening, that's decentering my needs. I'm not getting rid of my needs, but I'm decentering myself, and then that opens up the world around me.
Yeah.
You know, and we've been, you know, so I've been talking about transmission as well. You know, so, you know, we've already had discussions about assimilation, spiritual, you know, spiritual bypass, spiritual materialism, those kind of conversations. And, you know, one of the things that we've been exploring is, you know, we have to have a broader understanding of transmission, you know, that some people are doing practices and maybe they didn't have a teacher in this human realm, but they have a teacher, you know. And for me, I can actually sense that. For me, like, I can sense how transmission is working. I can sense one's connection to something that is a source of transmission, opposed to someone just saying, okay, I'm just gonna like pick up this bell and start ringing it, you know. I can tell if that has been, a bell ringing has been inspired by some kind of higher inspiration, you know, higher transmission, you know, that maybe we may not be able to see or understand, but it's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I attribute a lot of my like healing from the COVID, you know, being sick with COVID, to Kankalachari Kali, where like for 4 nights continuously, she's the only, that's her face is the only one that I could I mean, that's all I saw, and we had gone to her temple in West Bengal. And, you know, I felt this instant relationship with her, actually, even from before. Somebody had told me about that place, and which is why we went. And but there was some, she came to me, and it was that coming to me that solidified the deal in terms of the relationship. It wasn't purely aspirational on my part. Like, hey, let me get with you. It was more her showing up and me being like, oh shit, like this is we got a relationship here. And, it's not and it's deep. And there is some element of as you say, like transmission relationship with that. It's powerful. And again, it's like, I think a lot of the power in that is these beings are, whether or not they're more worldly kind of Dharma protector kind of things, or full out, Buddhas, like you might have dreams or visions about, you need to be open.
Yeah.
And, I've had interactions with people over the years, especially in Asia, who have these experiences, and they're like, well, I never received the empowerment for that. So that wasn't really real.
Yeah.
And that's a problem too. Like I'm speaking from personal experience. In it was like 1997 or something. I had this dream about the Mahasiddha Maitreya, but he wasn't in the dream. His students were, and they were all gathered around this rock. And a couple of them told me their names and their dreams. And years later, I read that so and so was a student of Maitreya. But they said, you're one of us. Like you're part of our family. Yeah. And in the dream, they're like, come back to this rock if you ever need anything from us, right? And I was with Sunma Dechinzangmo staying in her apartment then, and that morning when we were having breakfast, she's like, well, what did you dream last night? I was like, oh, funny you ask. Like, and I told her, and she's like, you have a connection with him, right? But her skill was to be able to show me that yes, you have this connection, right? Rather than me be like, oh man, I can't wait to have a connection with him, or I can't wait to receive the transmission for blah blah blah. That happened, and she told me at one point, we had a lot of just like very informal conversations, where she said, my practice and my deity, my yidam, is our Mahakala, and he comes to me every night and while I'm sleeping and teaches me. Yeah. So I've received hundreds of teachings directly from him. And the thing is that that's real. And again, she's a nun, or was a nun, who nuns occupy low places in terms of the power structure of the strict tradition. So there are a lot of people who would be like, oh man, she's just full of it, she's just a nun. But she made, there was no question for me, and that is something that we, it's the word agency, confidence, listen to our heart, being skeptical in a healthy way to the shiny tradition, to these centers and organizations where everything is only able to exist within a rather fine parameter of acceptability, is something to be wary of. And you can go and participate with those folks, that's fine, but it's really incumbent upon us, especially for our spiritual growth, to remain connected and open to these things as they arise. It could even be, like a ghost comes up. Now you're in a cemetery and all of a sudden you're feeling something, and that thing is there. There is a relationship there, and one where you can bring benefit to the ghost. Exactly. Or the ghost can actually tell you, there's something that you need to be aware of.
Exactly. And we have to normalize that.
Yes.
As well. We have to bring these experiences. Now, before I say all this, someone to backpack and say that, yes, there are many experiences experiences that you keep to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But there are experiences that you know that you have to communicate around. And often, and I feel like some of the experiences that we can't talk about are really or the experiences that we shouldn't talk about are really experiences that we can't even talk about anyway. They just don't have the words,
Mm-hmm.
like to describe these experiences. So they stay naturally hidden, and kept in our experience.
Right.
But for the rest of it, I think that we have to like normalize it, because I think there's a way in which we begin to help each other, right? And this is, I know this to be a fact, from my experience, from my practice, and from my reading into what's happening now. I know for a fact that many people are beginning to have abilities that are waking up. Like I know that people are beginning to have, these sensitivities to other realms. People are beginning to have more experiences with spirits and have more experiences with deities. Like there's all these articles out right now where people are like having intense dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Right now. And that can be a lot of things, but like I believe that that's also a part of like the ways in which we're being called into a different way of being. And we have to support each other and working with those abilities. They're kind of like waking for us. And I know people used to pull me to the side. When I teach retreats at other places, they will be like, I can't talk about this in my sangha. I remember years ago there was someone that I'd known for a bit who was just like, yeah, I'm having like experiences of awakening,
Mm-hmm.
It just feel, and she's like, I just can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
In this space, in this group, that was visiting,
Sure.
And I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we do get, there's all kinds of, of course you get labeled all kinds of things. And then of course we do have this history, particularly in the West, of like people taking advantage of us. You have these gurus, and a lot of abuse that happens because someone has proclaimed themselves to have,
Mm-hmm.
a certain connection to God, or, a certain realization. Of course, this is why I always come back to the community. Like, how much agency does a community have to question these experiences that their leaders are having? And I want us to be active in what we choose to believe in, and to have a healthy skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any realization has to be accompanied with a level of ethics,
Mm-hmm.
as well. And this is another conversation I have with people, kind of like other spiritual folks, doing all kinds of different things, where it's like we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So basically what people have been saying is that, like, oh, you have to explore things that may seem unethical, maybe in order to get to the heart of something. And for me, in my practice recently, that's been a very hard line that's been drawn, where it's been like, no, actually I don't. Like, no, I won't have like sex with a student.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there's like all this evidence that me having sex is going to get them enlightened. I was like, not in this life.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing something different. And it's, and that's the line, and I may come off as being really fundamental, and I may get pegged as being self-righteous, but there's a difference between being self-righteous and having integrity.
Yeah.
And I think too many people have weak and compromised integrity. So they read anyone with integrity as being self-righteous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's important for me is integrity. No matter what experiences that I have, like at the end of the day, I come back to these really basic core beliefs, which is to do no harm, right? You know, to work only on behalf of others, to free others, you know, which is bodhicitta, to only do the work for myself and only to work, to share the work with others, to get them free. That's really at the end of the day what I'm doing. I'm not here to get venerated and to get titles. I'm still looking to buy a Volvo, in the near future. So like that's really, of course, as soon as I get a Volvo, then like people are gonna talk so much shit. But no, it's like I'm here to do the work, and I'm so grateful to have examples of great realized people who have just been about the work.
Yes. Yeah.
They've not been about being famous or venerated or being rich. They've just been about trying to save people.
Yeah, I mean, most of my teachers were similar. They're great exemplars of everything, but most of them were not well known.
Yeah.
And I think that the focus on ethics, especially in this regard, is like it's essential. And the tantric tradition does kind of push us towards occasionally, facing transgression, but and looking at transgressive practice, but I agree 100% that if one has to do that, there are ways of doing it ethically, like that do not involve harming people, right? So if we're asked to push like our ideas of, like for example, our sacred cows, about like unexamined relationship to what's good and what's bad, we can explore those privately without making use of other people's bodies, without making use of other people's resources, without causing harm internally. Like we don't need, and maybe we don't even need to do that. It's a kind of off topic. It would be interesting to explore later in the future.
Yes.
But I think that connected to it is that just deep listening in relationship to who we are in terms of, quote unquote non-Buddhist practices, and then who we are in terms of listening deeply to whether or not we're inadvertently creating harm in a really general way. I'm wondering if Siddhartha wants to come on.
Siddhartha, come on. Yeah.
She's been waiting.
So Alex is going to bring you on.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at some of the comments too. I know we have questions in the question box. I see a lot of great comments as well from Irma. Yes, decolonizing our deity worship, receiving permission, consent is crucial. Yeah, that's exactly what we look at. It was just Sarada's birthday.
Oh, yay. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Lama Justin, it's so good to see you. I love you, and I'm so happy that you're on the other side of things.
Thank you. I love you too, and it's wonderful to see you. Although I look like did I freeze?
Yeah, I think you did. It looked like you just turned like Android or something.
Uh-oh. Now
where you at?
I don't know what's going on.
Where you at, Lama? Where the Lama at?
I don't know. I just disappeared. I got enlightened.
I could hear Nirvana. How is it there?
It's really good. They got cocktails here.
I got cocktails here.
Oh no. Maybe I'm gonna have to come back on. I don't know what's going on here.
Uh-oh.
All right, why don't you guys do your thing, and then I'll see if I can get back on.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've been having a conversation about so for those of you who don't know this, I don't know, like I'm weird with social media. Like I can stay in social media and pick up this stuff, but like at the same time I'm repelled by it. So it's weird. But recently, this past week, there was a white woman somewhere who started conjuring Papa Legba.
Oh, right.
Papa Legba is from voodoo.
Voodoo.
Yeah, voodoo, yeah. And and I've seen so what she did. She had broken up with her girlfriend and was
black.
The black girlfriend was black.
Yeah.
And she was going to get back at the girlfriend.
Yes.
By conjuring Papa Legba and trying to do and she put this on Instagram. So we know it's true because people have been sharing screenshots from her Instagram stories. Then she did it or something. She did something and then she suddenly died.
Yep.
And then that spurred a whole string of conversations, from people in the tradition about the parameters around deities and colonization and all this, which was super enlightening for me. Actually, I was really, I got a lot out of those conversations. I don't really get a lot out of these conversations at all. No, the white woman died. The white woman died.
Yeah, not the one that she was trying to kill. The one that did it.
Yeah. And the people authorized in the traditions, they were just like, no, this is, let's break it down.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah,
I mean, you know this, Justin knows this as practitioners of energies and deities, there's a part of it that's about permission, and there's a part of it that's about the container. And whether it's symbolically the container breaks or literally the container breaks, it breaks. My introduction to Buddhism was similar to my introduction of indigenous practices through people of color. And so there's something, I want to say sacred. That part of sacred, I think, that has to do with understanding your relationship. I don't want to say place because it's not hierarchical, but your relationship with something, which also has to do with your capacity. I can't do what you lamas do. You know what I mean? Even if I was to act that out, tend that behavior, I can't do that because you've been trained. And that training, you have a particular relationship. Right? And similarly, nobody can do what I do in terms of my relationship with deities, because I have a particular relationship, And I think at the core of that relationship is a kind of respect and a responsibility, I think. When I encountered African indigenous deities, it was in Cuba.
Yeah.
And it was very immersive, and it was just kind of you go down, there's a buffet, somebody's getting possessed, somebody's getting made, somebody's, people consecrating drums, sacrificing what they need to sacrifice, blood, food, or whatever, And there was something about that introduction to me that set a kind of understanding that when you are ready to know, you will know. When you're ready to do that, you'll do. And if you do something beyond what you have the capacity to do, you'll break. I always tell people, I danced in Haitian folklore Vodun and was around a lot of Vodun priests. I know a lot of, Ifa, Vodun, like people who are priestesses, and as a practitioner myself, which is distinctly different, right? But still this direct relationship, It is a responsibility. And that when you deal with any energy, whatever it is, you also take on the responsibility of it. And sometimes we don't know what it is. And if what we're trying to do is about control or trying to possess or trying to get back. You know, it's a reflexive response. That reflexive response will come back to us in return. There was a Babalawo that I worked with. He just said it so succinctly.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no good deed and no bad deed goes unpunished.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those things will go unpunished.
Mm-hmm.
The notion that something good can be punished, you know, for me, it really opened up my heart to this like real karmic responsibility of both.
Mm-hmm.
That both of them karmically are bearing the same weight.
Yeah.
So when you try to fix, you know, they call it fixing or bind somebody, you know, I take those things very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people who work within that and honor that, you know. And even now they take it very, very seriously. Mm-hmm. Because it is your life.
Yes.
It's not literal life. It's your spiritual life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's your light too. You know, not everybody needs to be doing that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, not everybody needs to be a Lama. You know, right? Not everybody needs to be a priestess.
Yes.
Not everybody needs to be initiated in order to have, like what you all were talking about, this direct relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to know your language, you know, and you have to know your guides.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you have to be able to always find them, no matter what the terrain is that you'll meet them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it be in your dreams and in your relationships, you know, in your life, you know, in your past lives, in your lives to come, you know, you have to understand that.
Mm-hmm. 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 And you have to, that's the patience, as you just, you know, like we have to be patient. We have to wait until we're ready to be touched. And I see the opposite happening often, where people are running out trying to like force a touching to happen. You know, and that's where the danger really is.
That's not striving. You and I were talking about it the other day, Lama Justin. You just brought that up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that striving, and you know, Rod, you and I talked about it as trauma, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it's also, and recently we were talking, it's about trust.
Mm-hmm. Trusting
that relationship will find you,
mm-hmm.
and that relationship will be more than what you need. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's the language, you know, that we have to be able to speak in order to get beyond that striving or that that reaching. You know, I mean, you know, I've always said, like, nobody can get into your body and get what you have or have what your experience is. You know? Only you can have that. And you do have to be patient, you know. And I think you also have to be, you know, like you said, you got to be falling into the earth.
Yeah.
And doing that trust fall of Bhumisparsha, right? Like touching the earth and letting the earth touch you back. But to do that first, I think you have to let go.
Yeah. You have to surrender. You have to surrender to something. And that's where the fear and terror arises, and that is the trust fall, right? I mean, it's the trust fall, you know?
Yes, yeah, because it's also, you know, Rod brought me to Swami Jai Devi, and what's so beautiful about going back into Hatha and going back into the tradition in a deeper way, you know, both because of where I'm at in my life, but because of the teachings, right, and the teacher. I realized the subtle ways in which my body tenses. You know, we were doing the fire breath.
Oh yeah.
And I was texting, I was messaging Swami, and I said, you know, I noticed when I do the fire breath, my anal sphincter muscle gets all tight, like I'm all anal retentive. You know what I mean? I mean, that could be literal sometimes too, right? Yeah. And all she said is just like, do it softer. You know, don't be. And I didn't even realize I was doing so hard in the practice, right? But it was that softening that allowed me to get a heat that wasn't like, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard to fall when you're tense.
Tell me about it. Yep.
It's impossible to fall when you're. I mean, you know, we haven't done it yet. It's on the list. Skydiving, and
Right. Yeah.
on the list. Lama Justin, you can.
I'll come. I'll be there. Say the word.
But Sean has gone, and he told me about the whole experience. And one of the things they tell you is that you have to absolutely relax, even if you think you're going to wet your pants or whatever. You have to do that. You know, you have to let go.
Yeah.
And that's about, trust, but I think it's also about that work of like that ego work, that as I'm reading about Chiamasta.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. That was with me when I bought that. So.
Yeah.
that work, right?
Yeah.
Of removing everything that you think you are.
Yeah.
And James Baldwin talks about that in The Artist's Struggle for Integrity, right? Yeah. Letting go who you thought you were, who you thought you were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful thing about it is that that's generative, So you remove everything, not because you hate yourself, or not because not because you hate yourself, or not because you don't want to exist, but you do that to heal and to feed and to be a generative presence, and that is the exact opposite of the fear that keeps us like striving for something else. I think that striving is rooted almost completely or partially, at least, but there's a lot of fear, that informs. There's a lot of fear that informs our striving when we are in that mode, and then when we can open up, we become this generative. Like Chinnamasta, she cuts her head off, but that's love, and that's healing, and that's supports everybody in the world.
And that generativeness, like Lama Justin, like I'm just thinking about how different that is than what we understand generativeness in this kind of Western or kind of colonized way. I don't know if you want to talk more about like what you mean by that. I think I understand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a non-contractual way, right? Because I mean, we still think of. I'm sorry. Am I freezing up?
No.
Okay. Cool. My computer is, so it's distracting. But we still think of generative qualities as being contractual in kind of a capitalist way. When we talk about being generative, it's about really authentically healing everything, and in this way where we understand our interdependence to the universe. So in this crisis, we can generatively heal whole communities, heal ourselves, contribute to. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
You can hear me. All right,
We can't see you, but we got you.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on my end, but the healing is authentic, and it's automatic. It's like all of the love coming out of us that doesn't end. I mean, I think that's the thing about Chinnamasta too, is her head comes off, and the blood flow that comes out, it's not an ending thing. It's this constant love, and you can't touch constant love when you're contracted by fear, or even going back to the Hatha Yoga, story Siddhartha is we contract for all sorts of reasons, and striving can be that, like, I'm going to get this breathing right, it's going to be deep and intense, and, and sometimes love is just letting go, or I think often love is letting go into whatever's happening right now, no matter how ordinary or non-dharmic or non-shiny, like for social media, it looks.
Thank you for that, Lama Justin.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm gonna look at some of the questions too, and we can just go through those. It's a question from Sarah. Hey, Sarah. Amarat, you've mentioned darshan before. I love darshan, actually. I have a limited understanding of it, but this discussion seems like a perfect opening to talk about it more. Wondering if you could talk and speak more to darshan. Yeah, this is a conversation we can all get into. For me, excuse me, I didn't get into like darshan really until I started studying with in Kashi, and I started going. Started having darshan, actually, like really authentic darshan. Where I was like, oh, this is new. This is really interesting. But darshan really, for me, my understanding of darshan is sacred glance. To be glanced by the deity that's more of a like formal definition, to be glanced by the deity, right? So this, when you like, if you go to like a Hindu temple, you may notice that the deities have these really wide eyes. Like I think about, we went to Tarapith in March, and Tara, the statue of Tara herself, there's like these really wide eyes because the eyes are the most important thing. We want to gaze into the deity's eyes. The deity is gazing back at us. That's darshan. A very fundamental, basic understanding of darshan. And then darshan, also another way of understanding it is the time that we spend at the feet of the guru. That's also darshan. That's like to be gazed by the guru, for the guru to actually see us, which could be either really terrifying or really liberating, depending on, in the exact way we've been talking about, Siddhartha, the ways in which we hold on and like we don't surrender, because the more we hold on and the more the deity is trying to reach us, the more that experience is going to be violent for us. I'm holding on, I'm closing down, the guru is trying to get in, and that's going to equal violence for me. So that's another darshan. So when we do Matara practice, which we'll be doing tomorrow at 11 a.m. And I have, we have a darshan section in the Tara practice where you're gazing up at Tara, and Tara is actually gazing back at you. And that's a really intense experience, and I want us to take that experience seriously. I want us to have the experience of being glanced and seen, in the same way that I have been so deeply seen by my teachers, like in a way that's been so disarming. That's the heart of darshan. It disarms you, like you're just being seen completely for who and what you are. The bad things and the good things, or whatever you may label that, the ugliness and the beauty, it's all there. And that's the only way we get liberated. We have to allow ourselves to be glanced if we want to get free.
I'm really thinking a lot about this being seen aspect of darshan. So I haven't had, maybe because it comes out of the Hindu tradition, it seems, or at least the tradition in which that, yeah, that's what I know about it. But my experience of darshan in that way of being seen, I think is, yes, it is violent. It can feel like naked, like that picture I posted this week.
Oh yeah.
And but not harmful.
Yeah.
I feel like that distinction feels really important for me. It's been important to me in terms of being able to be seen and practice the gaze of the deities, the gaze of the divine. I think being able to have that distinction for me has also allowed me to be seen, allowed me to be gazed upon and to gaze at. Like it's almost deepened this relationship that I have with the deities. Whether it's in the tarot practices that you've done or the medicine Buddha, like, and even my own practices, right? I remember being named. I'm just talking to my mother about this. So one of the things that kind of everybody has to be officially named if you're going to go up for federal recognition in a tribe. And so there was this kind of rush to name everybody when I was getting named. And I remember my mother saying to me, well, if you don't go, they're not going to recognize you. They're going to know you. And so, like, for me, that's a kind of darshan, that people, they see your essence. And they reflect that back to you. And so, like, for me, like, that point in the medicine Buddha practice, God, that you do, where, like, medicine Buddha looks at you, like, like just right up there, and he sees you, or they see you, and he gazes at you and you gaze back. And then all of that light embodies you. Like, it's like you become recognized.
Yeah. Yes.
But you also become embodied too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of all I wanted to say about that.
There's you have to be seen is a really high, profound, intense practice. I'm just noticing, Tremaine, you said, you've mentioned being witnessed feels so important for me as a person who came to this lifetime with identities that have been invisibilized. And so this is why, for me, darshan is so intense, because I am made visible in a way the world has, I'm made invisible. I am made visible in darshan, and all the parts of me are being made visible. The same parts. I don't know why I'm not getting this out. I am being made visible for the world in a way in which I'm deeply uncomfortable, because the world is so interested in perpetually erasing me. So there's a tension.
Absolutely.
Like, I remember, like, one of my first, like, student-teacher conversations with Swami Jaya Devi a couple of years ago, and she was like, you're going to have to do something with this, the pain around being Black and queer. And I was like, well, first of all, you don't have a right to say that. As this, like, older white woman.
Right.
And I had to look at that. I had to look at, like, my reaction to that, and I was, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
But, like, I didn't want that to be glimpsed, but it had to be glimpsed and held.
It's like, it's like sometimes, like, what people say, like, for me, darshan is sometimes like somebody being on your scent. It's like, I'm on your scent, like, and I want it to always be sweet. I don't want it to stank. Hey, Lama Justin.
Hey, I don't know what's going on.
We can talk about darshan being like, I want to be on your scent, a sweet scent, not a stank scent.
Right.
It's dangerous. So darshan is dangerous, particularly if it's not. So darshan is very similar, I guess, to wrath. With compassion, like wrathful compassion, which is like the compassion that's offered. And this, Irma, that gets to your question a little bit, but like that kind of compassion where it gets to the point. It's not about guarding your feelings, it's about saying what needs to be said in the moment. And it has to be offered from someone who's not trying to get anything out of it. They're not trying to hurt you, they're not trying to look good. They just see what needs to be said and just say it. And they can be like, whatever you want to do with that, it's up to you. Like, you can tell me to go to hell, you can kick me out, you can do whatever you need to do. But like, I love you in this moment, and I need to say this because I absolutely know that this is going to trigger you into freedom.
That's right.
You know, and that's Darshan. Darshan is just like, I'm just looking at you. Like, this isn't. I'm not trying to hurt you. You know, and Darshan also isn't about consent either. You know, that's the thing. That's the other thing. This whole thing. That's another conversation that we have to have at one
We do
point.
have to have that conversation about consent because it's
Yeah.
complex and
Yeah.
it is. It's very complex. It's very
Yeah.
complex. It's very and clearly yes and no. You know,
Yeah.
it's clearly yeah.
You know, if everything, if I needed my consent for everything, I wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't grow.
You know, I would have said no to everything. I was like, nah, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to chant this. You know,
Mhm.
you know, no, you know, my path has been, you know, my consent is a little bit. That's the trickiness of it.
Yeah.
It's just like this is where you get into the grading because a lot of stuff, a lot of violence, a lot of harm happens.
Yep.
When you
Yeah.
get into space. And
Yeah.
it has to be held by a really authentic teacher.
Yeah. Is it me? Or?
I think it's Justin. I think Justin has feedback.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I don't hear anything. I don't hear anything on my end.
Okay. Okay.
My sound isn't great anymore.
Okay.
Okay. We'll just we'll just
Okay.
figure it out as we go.
So we'll flag that for a later conversation because I think you're right. And the realized teacher, and also I think it's an extension of the conversation that you and Justin were talking about in terms of the ethics of teaching and the boundaries around, you know, what one is willing to do as a realized teacher to free your students.
Yeah. It does seem like it has feedback coming.
Well, it might be mine.
Well, let me do this. Let me put on the headphones and see if we can. How is that?
Is it mine?
Hey.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I can't hear you.
Everyone has a different experience.
I love it. I think it's over. Why I gotta be on the ride?
It's the deities fucking with us. I can hear.
I definitely think it's the deities. Like
this is a good example here. This is what Darshan. This is what happens in Darshan.
right.
It's like you can be in a room full of people.
Yep.
With a teacher, and everyone can have a different experience.
Yes. Yes. Well, because everybody needs to have a different experience because what their, I'll use the word medicine, right? Like what their medicine is different. You know, what they need, you know, and how they need it, you know. I mean, that's what teaching is. It's like regulating the poor. You know?
Yeah. Like it's nothing like walking out of a room
Yes.
with a really realized teacher and comparing notes and people just going, You're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I got this out of it. And they look at you, what?
Okay, like, were we in the same room? Because I didn't even hear that part of the conversation.
But that's the part of like really realize teachers is that they can speak individually. Their consciousness can split and speak individually to people in the space.
And it's also because they have a sense of what you are ready to learn, and that's the non-consent part, right? Like it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think for me, it's, you know, I think about my teacher, right? You know, my teacher Juan, Top Juan Gonzalez, and even, you know, Juan Abuela Juana, you know, the things they taught me, they didn't teach me until I was ready. And getting ready was not like, oh, I'm ready. I'm going. It wasn't striving. I just had to be quiet and be still, you know, and I had to do my work. And a lot of it was just being quiet and being willing to say, like, what is it? What is it I need to do next? You know, I'm here, just showing up. Really, it was like in just showing up and very casually, like, oh, come here, I want to show you something, and it would be the thing, you know, the ritual thing, you know. But it wasn't because I was like, oh, we've done this every year. Will you show me? Or I'm ready, you know, or I've done this step, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, no, you know, you're full enough. You know? The container is full enough. But I didn't know that. I just thought I was just like being humble and, you know, getting ready to hold the fire in a little place, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a quick thing. Justin can't get back into teaching. His theory is that like
What happened?
he can't get back into.
No, 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 no. Just a
Feels like we've said too much. Mhm. Well, there is a lot of energy. We've sucked a
yes.
lot of energy into the space, and
Mhm.
that's what happens.
That
Technology,
is what happens.
yeah. Um, but let's look at a few of these questions.
Okay.
I think they're um, Monica. Could you um, so Lama Rod said about Dharma protectors reminds me of something my undergrad Sufism professor said about growing up in Indonesia. He said that it was taught that God sent prophets to all corners of the world and that they taught using local language, and which was interpreted as including appropriate cultural metaphors. So based on that, people believe that Buddha, along with other deities, was a prophet. Yeah. I've been wondering what an appropriate analogy in the other direction would be. Um, and what exactly do you mean by an appropriate analogy in the other direction?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? Do you know something? Can you also
No,
clarify, Monica? I'm sorry.
no, no, no. Just like in reading that question, you know, I did a lot of the beginning of my work at the divinity school was comparative religion. And I think a lot of times, like one of the faults of comparative religion, and Diana Exworth talks about this, is being able to understand religious worldviews in their own terms. You know? So Buddha is not the Jesus or the God of Buddhism. And that and I think in base terms what she's saying is that like not everything can be translated or transliterated from one tradition to another.
So Monica just said, I want to avoid colonizing other faiths by assuming them into my practice. Right.
Yeah, so I guess I might just kind of start at understanding that whatever other faiths are, to not understand them from your own faith practice. And that's I think a huge step in egolessness, right? In like dropping your own story or your own sense making um, framework. You know, I mean, for me, you know, I think about like, you know, the work I did with Tazer and the archives. A lot of it was like speaking to ancestors, you know, and it was just sitting with that and trusting that. I think a big way to not colonize is to trust other bodies, their experience, and your experience, and see them as distinct, but also mutually valuable. I think that's where I begin. You know, I don't have to experience something to believe that something is happening. Was there something else you welcome? Oh, you welcome, Monica. You're
To idiot compassion, trying to be supportive. I'm struggling with boundaries for my sister and myself. Um, yeah, you know, sometimes it's when we're trying to do compassion like this, it's about um,
Hey, Justin.
like we have to let go. So when we're doing like really authentic compassion, we have to kind of let go of trying to come out of this okay and clean and everything wrapped up nice and neat. You know, um, you have to have a sense of like, okay, this is what I can do, and I'm doing it, or I've done it, and then after that, whatever happens, happens. And when we're doing this kind of idiot compassion, it's really coming out of like our own insecurity. It comes out of the ways in which we it comes out of the ways in which we not only decenter our needs, but we just kind of like lose our needs in the relationship. And that's not how it's. Compassion is about always holding our needs along with the needs of others, because that actually helps us to remember the boundaries and remember and to have a sensitivity to when the relationship creeps into violence, you know, for us, you know, or when we become enablers, you know, because enabling is really about us avoiding our own insecurity and unwillingness to confront the reality of a relationship, you know, and the fear that we have, you know, when we don't meet the needs of other people. You know, that's all self-centered. Like I just feel like enabling is really about us centering our needs in a way that's actually not helping. You know, and a particular need is the need to avoid conflict and the need to make people unhappy. I know, Irma, that's something you've been working with for a while. Now I know we talked about that recently as well. Um, Justin keeps going in and out, so you know our session may be coming to a close because the deities are like, So, Bhumisparsha, will we ever possibly introduce some kind of nindra? Perhaps a kind of nindra that's flexible and eclectic, reflecting spirit of the day's type of discussion? Yes. Nindra, for those of you who aren't familiar, nindra are this set of like introductory practices that you traditionally practice to get access to higher teachings, but they were really just put together to keep young monastic boys occupied. And so we translated that into the West as something that is essential for progress along Tibetan Buddhist path, which is just something that's more artificial and cultural that we have to retranslate. It's not that I'm against Nundro. I think there's a lot of really important things, but I think Nundro will be different. You know, it's not going to be about 100,000 prostrations and 100,000 mantras of Vajrasattva. It's not going to be about that because that feeds too much into the ways in which we think that we can just accumulate and just arrive somewhere. Thank goodness. I mean, I've completed like 2 ninjas, and like it's really not my favorite thing. Prostrations aren't my favorite thing, but I think Vajrasattva is beautiful, mandala is beautiful. We've been talking about mandala practice and offering and Tara. I'll talk about it again tomorrow. Guru Yoga is really beautiful. The 4 thoughts to turn the mind to the Dharma is really beautiful. We just need to reconceptualize it in a way that makes more sense, and to do it in a way that you're not trying to achieve something. Unfortunately, that's how Orthodox Minto is conceived. Okay, I think that's it. The questions, yeah. You can reach out now. Lama Justin isn't here. I know. Is it possible to write you for guidance on how to record, receive teachings and meditations and dreams in your trans pantheon? Experiences expanding that? Absolutely. So this goes back to what we were just saying earlier. That your sensitivity is deepening, is expanding right now. Like, because this is a time where the unseen world, particularly those beings who are trying to benefit this world, they're trying to get in. You know, they're trying to get born into the world. You know, they're trying to like possess people. You know, they're trying to express themselves as much as possible. You know, they're looking for touchstones. So a lot of deities, a lot of like benevolent spirits use objects in the physical world as like touchstones to get them into the world. You know, that's why we have statues. You know, that's why we have altars, because these are touchstones for deities to be in relationship with us in the world. So of course, all this is expanding for us. You know, so it's okay. Yeah. So like, yeah, please feel free to write. You know, people can write me their experiences. You know, I'll just put my email. I'm not good at responding to emails or social media stuff, you know, as some of you know, but I will try to be sensitive and timely. I'll at least pray for you if you don't get an email back from me. So, okay. I think it's time to wrap up. We're going to do, so this is, yeah, again, this is just like, you know, we're moving forward from this, however we move forward from it. And we just, you know, we're committed to the adapting, we're committed to the opening, we're committed to allowing ourselves to be touched. And that's really like what my whole thing is. My agenda is I am just opening myself to being touched, you know, and to be guided in the ways that I should be guided in order to benefit beings. You know, I don't know if it's about, you know, it's not about being a Buddhist, it's not about being a Hindu practitioner, it's not about being Christian, it's not about being a shaman, you know, but it's just about trying to evolve to be the best expression of compassion that I can be in this body, in this life. That's it. You know, that's really it. And ethically and responsibly using the tools that I'm exposed to help bring about that compassionate embodiment. You know, be it Tara, be it Kali, be it, you know, Anansi, you know, whatever it may be, to enter into an ethical relationship and a mutually beneficial relationship as well. To honor, to respect, take it seriously, the relationships that we're cultivating with the unseen world. So to have a sense of awe, to have a sense of like deep reverence, you know, because as you know, like there are entities that will beat us down into reverence and surrender. You know, but if you can just start there, it's going to be a much easier thing, you know. As someone who is hard-headed, you know. So I've learned that like I have to start bowing, you know, and surrendering. It's just going to be easier. It's going to be so much easier in the long run. So now you want to share a little last word or so?
Yeah, I think I'm just moved to. I just underscore the generosity as a practice of both humility and surrendering. This kind of falling, this letting go, this letting in, that love, that all of the linguistic, both literally linguistic, but spiritually linguistic practices, you know. I just think it's about making more space for what needs to come through, and what needs to be healed to be healed. I think that's all. Yeah.
Do like a closing practice here quickly, and then Alex is going to put up a donation box, and so whatever we collect is going to go to Siddhartha for her effort and her generosity today. So thank you so much. And I know there's a lot of feedback, so I'll make this super quick. So just coming back into a short practice, I invite you to just come back into the breath, and listen to the breath. Letting the noticing of the breath bring you into this moment. As you come into the moment, everything blossoms within our minds, within our experiences. Returning to the feet, noticing the feet, the weight of our bodies. Noticing the earth under us. We give thanks for the earth, for its love, for its support. The mother of the earth. The earth who is the mother. We thank her. We offer gratitude to the earth. We offer gratitude for our breath. We offer gratitude to our bodies. We offer gratitude to our minds. And we offer gratitude to our benefactors, our deities, our ancestors, our lineage, our gurus and teachers, whomever they are. We thank them for their love, for their support, for their vision. In our minds, we imagine making offerings to them, whatever is appropriate for you. However you choose to offer your love, your compassion, your gratitude, pray to our benefactors, our guides, our guardians. We ask them for their forgiveness for anything that we've done to transgress our relationship with them. We ask that they continue to show us how to be in harmony and how to be in relationship with them, and how to be in relationship with ourselves and with what is conducive for our realization and enlightenment. We pray that they never leave us, that they continue to guide us and keep us, and to continue to forgive us anytime we overstep our boundaries. And finally, we thank this community, all who have gathered to be with us. May we all be free as quickly as possible. May we become true lovers of one another. May we love one another intensely and deeply. May we help each other get free. We dedicate the merit of this practice also to all those beings, all the members of our communities who are dying, who are suffering, not just from COVID-19, but just all the members of our communities, our families, our friends, who are suffering. We dedicate this merit to them that they may be free from their suffering, that they may have everything that they need in order to be happy, to be free from suffering. All right, everyone. Thank you. It's been a blessing. And I'll see you tomorrow if you want. 11 o'clock, Matara. I think it's at 11. Check the schedule to make sure. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Please be well.
Thank you, everyone. I love you all.